Before we start, I always recommend taking a moment for spiritual protection. Maybe say a quick prayer or find a moment of peace, because they say when we talk about these entities, they get curious and might start paying attention. So, keep a light on and stay safe. Let's get to the story. But first, a quick favor. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please hit that button. It's what motivates me to keep finding these great, terrifying tales. Thanks for the support. Now let's dive in. My name is Adam, and I'm a long-haul trucker. I've logged thousands of miles in my life, and this run from San Diego to Montana is one I've done countless times. But this one particular trip is burned into my memory. No need to waste time, I'll start right up. This all happened back in 2021. I was hauling a load from San Diego, heading up to a depot in the mountains of Montana. It was a pretty standard run until I hit the mountain roads in Idaho around midnight. It was a brutally cold winter night. I've driven at night alone a ton of times. I had only stopped 3 times for food and gas since leaving California. Trucks barely go above 40 miles per hour on those mountain grades, so it's a long haul. When I entered the high mountain passes near the Bitterroot National Forest, the silence was deafening. It was desolate, pitch black, and just felt terrifying. The road looked menacing. When my headlights hit the asphalt, all I saw was a circle of light surrounded by a terrifying void. I kept rolling, with some soft country music playing on the tape deck to keep me awake. As I started climbing a steep grade, my truck's temperature gauge shot up. I initially ignored it. It's normal on a climb with a heavy load, but it kept rising dangerously high. I figured I should pull over and let the engine cool down. Plus, I hadn't had a cigarette break in a while, so I could relax and have a smoke. I pulled the truck over and shut the engine off, leaving the headlights on. The moment I stepped out, the air was thick with dread. No houses, no other vehicles, nobody for miles, just a vast, terrifying emptiness, and the biting cold. I lit a cigarette, enjoying the smoke by the truck. My headlights illuminated the stretch of road ahead. Behind me, nothing but jet black night mid-cigarette. I heard a rustling sound coming from the thick brush on the passenger side of the truck. It sounded like something was moving toward the road. I thought maybe it was a local, but who would be out here at this hour in this cold? It was dead silent, so quiet I could hear every scrape and crunch of whatever was moving. But the sound wasn't normal. It wasn't the steady gait of a person. It would move, stop, move, stop. It was erratic. I started to feel like I was being watched, like something had noticed my truck's lights and knew I was there. I waited for someone to appear, but nothing came. I figured it must be an animal, but the area felt too isolated for a regular critter. Fear started to creep in. I remembered what the old-timers say about these lonely places. They can be home to other things, too. I decided the smartest thing was to get back in the cab and wait for the engine to cool down. Before I did, I wanted to quickly check the dual rear tires. Big rocks can get wedged in there on these roads. My cigarette was almost finished, and the rustling had stopped. I felt a chill, that heavy feeling of being stared at. I bent down to check the tires, shining my phone's flashlight. No rocks. But just then, in the weak light filtering past my truck, I saw a subtle movement on the other side. Someone was standing there, still, like they were waiting for the right moment to jump me. I knew I had to move smart. My initial movements were loud, but the next had to be silent. The plan: slip into the cab, lock the doors, and start the engine. I eased the driver's door open. It was an old truck, and the hinge creaked faintly. Before anyone could react, I slammed it shut and locked both the driver's and passenger's doors. I turned the ignition. The heat gauge had dropped slightly. I decided to hell with it. I'd rather run hot and risk the engine than stay here. I'd find a safe spot down the road. I put it in gear, my eyes glued to the mirrors, expecting whatever it was to jump out in front of the truck or try to open the doors. Nothing. As the truck pulled away, I glanced in the side mirror and saw two eyes glowing. They were the color of an animal's eyes in the dark, like a cat's, but they were positioned at the height of a man. I couldn't see a body, just those two luminous orbs reflecting my tail lights. And as the truck gained speed, the eyes stayed in the same spot, unmoving. It wasn't chasing me. My foot was flooring the gas, but the truck held to its usual slow, safe speed. Soon, the road began to get socked in by heavy fog. I had to slow down even more. Climbing the mountain, the fog was getting thicker, demanding all my attention. I desperately needed to find a town, a diner, anywhere with lights. My mind was racing. What was that thing? A drifter? A Wendigo? I drove for about 30 minutes and the visibility dropped to almost zero. My headlights were just illuminating a sheet of white. Driving became too dangerous. I had to pull over. The earlier encounter had me terrified of stopping in the middle of nowhere, but the fog gave me no choice. I finally found a small dirt pullover area off the shoulder. I parked, shut off the engine, and killed all the lights. I wanted the truck to be invisible. The plan was to wait for the fog to clear, probably not until morning. It was freezing. I had to use the bathroom. I got out, the air feeling heavy and wrong. I took my flashlight and walked a short distance, finding a spot behind a thick pine tree. I just wanted to finish and get back to the safety of the cab. As I was about to stand up, a blaring horn shattered the silence. It was a massive, sustained blast, like someone was leaning on it with all their weight. My heart jumped into my throat. I spun around. It was my truck, barely visible in the dense fog. I stood frozen for a few seconds, then slowly walked back, my heart pounding against my ribs. My hands were shaking. Who blew the horn? The doors were locked. No one was inside. I shined my light inside the cab, then checked the tires and the ground. Nothing. I told myself it must have been a short circuit. I opened the door, climbed in, checked the wiring, and took a deep breath. Just a phantom scare. I told myself it was the cold and the tension. Then I noticed the horn button was damp, like someone with wet fingers had pressed it. My palms were sweating despite the cold. I put the key in, turned on the lights, and looked around. I knew I couldn't drive. I killed the lights again, straightened the seat, and sat down, pulling a blanket over me. Occasionally, I heard a faint, high-pitched whistle in the fog. It was around 2 a.m. Suddenly, I heard a quiet, metallic tap, tap, tap coming from the rear tires. It sounded exactly like a small hammer tapping lightly on metal. I listened closely. I thought it might be ice or a loose part, but the rhythm was too deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and stepped out. The cold wind hit me. I crept to the back. I checked the tires and the undercarriage. Nothing. The sound stopped. I figured it was my imagination and got back inside. As soon as I was under the blanket, the tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. But this time it was on the other side of the truck. My hands started trembling. I knew I had to check. I got out again, this time on the passenger side. The fog was so thick. I shined my light on the ground and saw fresh footprints in the dirt near the tires. They looked like someone had just been standing there. I looked up. Nothing. Just then, I heard a faint clunk from the front of the truck, like someone gently touching the door handle. I bolted back to the cab, locked the door, and checked around empty. The quiet returned, and I lay down on the sleeper bunk behind the seats. I vowed not to react to anything else. I will ignore it. But I was wrong. Whatever was out there was determined to get my attention. I had been lying there for a few minutes when I heard the unmistakable sound of the trailer's rear latch being tampered with. These are massive, heavy-duty locks. I heard a scraping sound, then a sharp, loud clank. The entire truck vibrated. The rear door had been opened. I felt a small wave of relief after yelling. I secured the door and headed back to the cab. Just as I reached for the door handle, a terrifying, cackling laugh echoed from the woods, sounding distant, mocking. It broke my will. My body and mind were disconnected. I felt paralyzed by the bizarre, unrelenting terror. I finally managed to crawl back into the cab. I decided I wouldn't move, no matter what. I was going to ignore it. They feed on fear, the elder said. I stayed put, waiting for it to end. After a long silence, I started to feel safe, but the danger was just beginning. I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel, coming to my door. Then a distinct knock, knock, knock on the door panel. It felt like my soul left my body. I had pulled the curtain across the front windshield and taped up the side windows. But because of the truck's high cab, there was a small gap near the door. The knocking continued, and then I heard a heavy, ragged breathing sound. I looked out the small gap. The outside was still dark, but I saw a faint cloud of mist, the condensation of breath in the cold air, right by the door. Whatever was out there was right up against the glass, breathing. Then, more footsteps. I could hear other, lighter footsteps joining the first set, and the knocking started on the passenger side, too. Now I heard grunting and snorting right by my door. It sounded like multiple things were gathering around the cab, circling, bumping the truck, and constantly knocking. They were looking for me. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the air, human footsteps, and the jingle of a keys. A light flared up against my windshield curtain. Someone with a flashlight was approaching. The noise outside instantly faded. I could hear the faint, receding steps of the entities moving back into the trees. A man's voice called out from the darkness. "Hello, is anyone in there? Don't worry, I'm a local. I heard your horn earlier. I live a ways down, and I came to see if you needed help. I know this area can be strange. I know about the things that happen here. Open up. I can help you. I'm not going to hurt you." I couldn't believe it. I was terrified, but this was my chance. I slowly opened the door. The man was friendly, a local in a thick jacket. He confirmed the area was notorious for strange occurrences. He offered to take me back to his house. He had a small bunkhouse I could sleep in. I locked my truck and went with him. I was completely drained and just needed a safe place. He was a great host, gave me a clean bed in his detached garage, and fed me a hot breakfast in the morning. He walked me back to my truck, and I drove off at sunrise. That was my terrifying night in the mountains. This story was sent by Scott. You've probably heard of the stretch of Interstate 40 that cuts through the New Mexico desert, often called the Cut or the Badlands in our circles. At night, it's absolutely terrifying. It's nothing but darkness, silence, and an intense feeling of dread. If you're alone, with no car in front or behind, it can genuinely make you shake. And I'm not just talking about ghosts or monsters yet. This region is notorious for highway bandits and smugglers. They operate in the shadows. They box in vehicles, shoot at tires, hijack the trucks, steal the cargo, and hold the drivers for ransom. It's a serious, terrifying threat. For us big rig drivers, there are two major dangers here: the armed bandits and the more advanced cargo thieves. You hear stories about guys climbing onto a moving trailer, breaking the seal, and transferring the contents to another vehicle speeding alongside us. If you don't realize what's happening until you stop, a big chunk of your load is already gone. They're that silent and efficient. This night we were a convoy of 3 trucks. We usually try to hit the interstate early, around 2 or 3 p.m., so we can cross that notorious stretch before sunset. Our biggest mistake that day was that we didn't get on the highway until around 7:30 or 8 p.m. near the Texas border. There were 6 of us, 2 guys per truck. We decided to risk it, figuring, if we wait for morning, we lose half a day and we have a tight deadline for the Phoenix drop. We all had rear-view cameras installed on our trailers. The lead truck had a working camera and screen. The middle truck had a working camera, but their screen was out. My truck, the third one, had both a perfectly working camera and screen. So the lead driver, Jim, said, "You take the back, Scott. Keep an eye on the rear for all of us." We agreed to stick together, keep the speed stable at about 65 to 70 miles per hour, and watch each other's backs. We said a quick prayer for safety and rolled onto the highway. It was smooth until about 10:30 p.m. I had actually put on one of your horror stories to listen to. That's when things started going sideways, I swear. After that night, I've stopped listening to horror stories in desolate places. I only listen during the daytime now. Around 11 p.m., I had your story playing loudly. I had both cab windows slightly lowered. I can quickly close the driver's side, but the passenger's side is harder to reach while driving. About 10 or 12 minutes into the story, I was hit by an incredibly intense, beautiful fragrance. It was an odd, sweet scent, the most peaceful, amazing thing I had ever smelled. I was immediately confused and unsettled. Where did this come from in the middle of the desert? It lasted for about 7 or 8 minutes, then vanished completely. Right after it vanished, a horrible, choking stench hit me. It smelled like a foul mix of rotting chemicals and something burnt. It was so bad it felt like it was scorching my throat and lungs. I grabbed my air freshener and sprayed my mask, putting it over my face, but the smell was too powerful. I wrapped a spare shirt around my face, but it didn't help. I called the lead truck driver, Jim. "Jim, are you smelling anything? A nasty chemical smell?" He said, "No, man. Why? Are you okay?" I told him how bad it was, that I felt like I was going to pass out. As we talked, the smell suddenly cleared. He just said, "See? Just your imagination, Scott. Stay focused." I hung up, feeling rattled. My story had played ahead, so I rewound it about 10 minutes. I always listen very carefully. I hate missing a single second. As I was listening, I heard a loud, metallic clank, clank. It sounded exactly like someone hitting the heavy reinforced padlock on my container with a hammer. That lock is massive and unbreakable. I tried to break it once when I lost the key and failed. I looked at the camera monitor. Nothing. No car behind me. I knew thieves needed a vehicle to climb from. I sped up slightly to catch the middle truck. I called the middle driver. "Look behind my trailer, man. I think someone's on my roof. I heard the lock getting hit." He checked, called back, and said, Nothing, man. Clear. Just relax. I slowed down again, still scared, but trying to tell myself it was just engine noise. I rewound your story again. I was starting to feel a different kind of fear now, not just fear of robbers, but a deeper, unsettling dread. About 5 minutes later, a loud thwack hit the passenger side of my cab right near the door. It sounded like a large stone. I looked over, but it was just blackness. I called the others. "Look out! Something just hit my truck. This area is not safe." They just told me to stay calm. Around 11:30 p.m., I felt a terrible gaze on me. I had the intense feeling that something was sitting on the roof of the cab on the passenger side, leaning down and staring at me through the small gap in the window curtain. I snapped my head to look, but I saw nothing. I immediately shut off your horror story. This was getting way too real. Now I started hearing a light, rhythmic drumming on the roof. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like someone lightly tapping a closed door. My driving became erratic as I tried to control my fear. The lead driver called me. "Scott, what's up? Why are you swerving? You sleepy?" I said, "No, man. There is something on my roof. I need you to check." I pulled my truck alongside his. He checked the roof of my cab and said, "Hafez, there's nothing. You're just scaring yourself. You take the lead now." I moved to the front of the convoy for about 10 or 15 minutes. Nothing happened. "See, Scott? Nothing's wrong. Come back behind us," Jim said. I fell back into the last position. The moment I did, the tapping started again. More insistent this time. I was driving with dread, my vehicle drifting wildly on the road. I was focused on the road, but my eyes kept darting to the camera monitor. Suddenly, I saw 7 or 8 pairs of luminous, glowing eyes in the darkness behind my trailer, running full speed toward the truck. They looked like dogs or coyotes, but their eyes were burning bright in the infrared camera feed. I was paralyzed with panic. I quickly reached over, pulled up the passenger side window, and locked the door. Then I did the same on my side. I grabbed my phone to record the camera feed, to prove to the others what was happening. My phone completely froze. The camera app wouldn't open. It just hung up, useless. For 7 or 8 minutes, as those glowing eyes chased me on the screen, my phone refused to work. Finally, the animals vanished. My camera feed was clear. I put the phone down, relieved, but then a terrifying figure appeared right in the frame. It was a completely jet-black silhouette of a man, bald with no distinguishing features. He leaned in close to the camera, closing his eyes. Then his eyes flew open. They were glowing an intense, shocking red, like burning coals. He gave the camera a huge, silent, horrifying grin, and then the smile twisted into an expression of pure, predatory rage. I thought, this is it. I'm going to die. I floored the gas, cutting off both trucks. "I am not staying in the back," I screamed into the radio. "Something is on my truck. I'm going to the front, and I'm staying there." As I was yelling, my right front tire exploded with a loud bang. I told them what happened. "Keep driving," Jim shouted. "We'll stop at the next service area," I said. "No, we'll ruin the rim. We have to change it now." So we pulled over onto the shoulder. My truck was in the middle. We had 6 guys, so we figured we could change it quickly. The first thing we noticed, the tire iron was missing. I was certain I had it, and placed it right by the wheel. We had to borrow one from the lead truck. Then, as 2 of us struggled with the rusted nuts, we heard the sound of a child crying coming from the ditch next to the highway. We all stopped and looked down. Nothing was visible in the bushes by the perimeter fence. One of the drivers who was getting the spare tire suddenly started making shooing noises. Shoo! Get out of here! He was trying to shoo away a black cat that was sitting right next to the spare tire. As we looked, the cat just sat there, cleaning its paw. Then 2 more black cats emerged from the darkness and joined it. As we watched, the cats' faces started to horribly distort, becoming longer, like a wolf's snout, and small black horns seemed to sprout from their heads. Their bodies were still cat-like, but their forms were impossibly wrong. They began to circle us, growling, a deep, chesty sound, like predators before a kill. We were terrified, huddled together. Then suddenly, 10 more cats appeared from the ditch, completely surrounding us. They were fixed on us with pure malice. I started to pray loudly. Only 2 of the 6 of us knew any proper prayers. The creatures moved back slightly but held their circle. Just then, a state trooper car with flashing lights came speeding down the highway. As the bright lights hit them, the creatures scattered and bolted down into the ditch. We were frozen. The officer pulled up and asked what was wrong. We were a mess, shaking and crying. We tried to explain the wild cats. The officers were skeptical but professional. They pulled their rifles and told us to quickly change the tire. When we went to get the spare tire, it wasn't there. We found it thrown over the wire fence near the ditch. It was heavy, and there were no footprints in the dirt nearby. 3 of us had to heave the massive tire back over. We quickly changed the tire, put the tools away, and scrambled to get out of there. But as the police lights pulled away, the creatures came back. They rushed out of the ditch and surrounded us again, snarling. We all piled into the rear cab of the middle truck. We locked the doors and pulled the curtains. The creatures came up to the truck, and we heard a loud thumping and scratching on the doors. Then they started rhythmically knocking on the cab. Inside, we were all screaming. Everyone was blaming me for listening to horror stories. Then, a motorway patrol vehicle suddenly pulled up and parked right behind our convoy. We thanked God. As soon as the new lights hit the scene, the creatures vanished. We finally finished the work, put the busted tire away, and drove off at top speed. I told them I was never driving through that area at night again. I pulled off at the next major service area, and I refused to leave until morning. That night convinced me that some places are just too dangerous for your imagination or for anything else. I hope you share this as a serious warning to other drivers.